Thanks for coming out today. My name's Jeff Farris. I'm the U.S. Sales Manager for Robert Sorby. And I got to tell you, you were probably, maybe a couple of foot-pounds away from having 2 accidental cancellations this week. I fell last week and sprained my right wrist, and it was killing me. It still is bad. So if you see me favoring my right hand, that's why. But I didn't want to cancel out on you because I knew that you'd already had one. And what I'd like to do for you today is demonstrate some techniques, demonstrate some tools. Obviously, my job is selling tools. So I'm going to show you some stuff that hopefully you haven't seen before. I see an awful lot of familiar faces out here. I know a lot of you guys have seen me demonstrating at Hartville. I demonstrate at Rockler a lot. I demonstrate at woodcraft stores a lot. And I'm starting to do quite a few club demos too. So hopefully this won't be too repetitive for you guys that have seen me before, or maybe I'll do something a little bit different and we'll get something new out of it. Just to get me going in the right direction, how many complete beginners do I have? 25%. How many absolute experts I know everything do I have? Oh, come on now. I'm sure that most everybody is somewhere halfway in between. I'm going to try and do a little bit of something for everybody. And you guys that do know what's going on, be a little bit patient with me when I'm going over this stuff for the beginners, because remember that you were there one day too. And of course, I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about Sorby tools and how they came about. Before I got my name badge, all of our shirts and all of our smocks say Robert Sorby on them. And guys come up to me at demonstrations all the time and say, Mr. Sorby, it is so nice to meet you. I've been using your tools for years. Well, the problem is Robert Sorby has been dead for 400 years. Robert Sorby, just the history of the name and the company, Sheffield, England, became a steel-making area because of the facilities that they had. They've got water power, they had iron ore, and they had a lot of coal. And it was all within that area where it was nice and convenient. And so that's where tools and weapons were made in England from really the beginning of the Iron Age. And it evolved. It was an area where some very good makers were taking advantage of some very good natural resources. About 400 years ago, or thereabout, there were a lot of tools being made and a lot of weapons being made, and there was a pretty wide variance between the good makers, the mediocre makers, and the poor makers. And Robert Sorby was one of the people who took pride in his work and in the name Sheffield. And so Robert started a organization, one of the very first trade organizations in the world, and it was the Guild of Cutlers. And Robert Sorby was the first master cutler of Sheffield. And they set up a guideline for what made in Sheffield meant. And those rules are still in effect today. So when you see made in Sheffield on a tool, for 400 years, either a private individual or a corporation has been making tools under the name Robert Sorby. For the last 100 years or so, that has been the company that I work for now. We use M2 high-speed steel. Now, a lot of our competitors are going to more exotic alloys. And believe me, we've experimented with every single one of them. But here's what happens with steel. If you take a carbon steel tool like a chisel or a plane iron, that is a super fine grain structure that gives you a very, very keen edge. But because to get that grain structure, you have to give up, because you've got the fine grain structure, it's going to be a little bit softer. Okay? So you go to M2 high-speed steel. Now, grain structure is a little coarser, but your steel's much harder, which is very good for turning. And that scale just keeps going. If you go to harder materials that claim better edge retention, you're giving up grain size. Okay, so the bigger the grain size is, the less of an actual edge you can put on the tool. So A11, M42, all these other exotic alloys that you can buy today, you spend a lot more money, you gain a little tiny advantage in edge retention, but you give up edge quality. And we don't think that that's worthwhile. So that's why we're sticking with M2 until we find something better. And believe me, we test it every single time a new alloy comes out. So M2 high-speed steel, what we think is the perfect match of hardness and fineness. The handles. Handles on our tools are American-grown, sustainably harvested ash. We buy our ash from a company that has certified that they're planting ash trees at the same pace that they're harvesting ash trees. So we should always have a supply of this top quality ash. We also make that handle in 7 different sizes. That's quite a few more than any of our competitors. So the handle size is always matched to the tool that you're grabbing. We also have an interchangeable handle system that we call the Sovereign. Now, interchangeable handles are nice for deep hollowing. They're also very nice if you travel. I've got a set of tools, a full set of tools in a box this big. So if you go south for the winter and you take a mini lathe with you, you can have a full-size set of tools in a box this big, just with an interchangeable handle system. That's the Sovereign handle system. It's becoming very, very popular. And then the other thing I want to talk about today is we can't do anything with this until we've got an edge on the tool. And that's where we're going to start today, is with our sharpening system. Fab work, I'm not, probably some of you guys well understand what I'm talking about. Belt grinding in fabrication is much more common than wheel grinding. It's more efficient, it's cooler, it's easier to change the cutting action of the belt. So belt grinding is very, very prominent in industry, less so in the hobbyist market. But about, I'm going to say 80% of all the cutting that's done on these tools in the factory is done on belt equipment rather than with wheels. Okay, so that's when we looked at that and we decided that we wanted to put something out there for a sharpening system. The boss said, hey, you know what, why don't we sell our customers what we use? And in England they call it a linisher. Here in the States, you'll see there's a company in Missouri called Burr King that makes a machine that they call a belt grinder. This is not a belt sander. It doesn't work like a belt sander. It doesn't track like a belt sander. And we don't use the same type of belts. I'll just grab one out of here. So the belts that we use are very carefully made, and people say, well, you know, is that a standard belt size? No, it's not a standard belt size. And we weren't trying to get deeper in your pocket by making it a size you had to get from us. You really need to use belts that are made for cutting steel, because they're made different than the belts that you buy at Home Depot or Lowe's. The belts have to be spliced. Most belts are lap seamed. They just kind of thin the material out a little bit, lap them over, glue them together. Okay, that type of a belt, when it comes across the plat, has a pretty good thump. Okay, these are spliced. They're cut on a bias. They're put back together with a very, very thin and very strong heat and pressure activated tape. So when that seam comes across the platen, there's barely a bump at all. You can just barely feel it. The other side benefit of that is they're very carefully controlled to be straight at the seam, and they're also carefully controlled to be all the same length. Bottom line to that is you will not have to mess with the tracking on this machine. There is a tracking adjustment. Most people never have to touch it. I can take a brand new belt, I can put it on here, I can take a 3-year-old belt, put it on here. They're all going to track exactly the same, which is right to the edge of the platen. So that's a little bit about why we're using belts. Cooler, flat bevel, not hollow ground bevel, and very easy to change from one grit to another. The other thing that people struggle with in sharpening is, number one, knowing what angle to put on the tool in the first place, and then number two, having a way to actually get that angle set. And we wanted to make that as simple as possible. So on the front of the tool here, we have a chart. And the chart shows us all the various turning tools and bench tools and knives and everything else. And then what angle they should be ground at. Then over here on the side, there is a diagram. And that diagram, can we get just a little bit tighter on the camera? Right on this side of the machine, right here. Aha, perfect. Okay. So over here, whoops, other way. There we go. So over here on this side, at the back of the frame, there is a series of holes. And those holes are how we set our angle. So we're going to start out in both our project and in the sharpening with a roughing gouge, a spindle roughing gouge. Go to square it around. If I look on my chart and find roughing gouge, it says that wants to be 45 degrees. Okay? And on the chart, it tells me 45 degrees is the fourth hole down. So all I've got to do is come back here to the back, find the fourth hole from the top, and put that little index pin right there in that fourth hole. And now I know that I'm right on 45 degrees. So that gets us the right angle. The other thing we want to do here is make sure that while we're sharpening, our tool's not going to fishtail on us right and left. So we're going to take this little V block and drop it in the track of the table. So as long as the round shape of my gouge is in that V block, I know that I'm perpendicular to my abrasive. And then it's duck soup. All we have to do is bring it up to the belt, keep it down in the V block, give it one quick pass around, and we've got a fresh edge. Not a lot, just in contact. Okay? So next, let's do a scraper. We'll go to our chart, and the chart tells us that wants to be 80 degrees. So we'll unlock the table. We'll find that next to last hole. There's 80 degrees. There's our table lock back up. Grab that and my skew at the same time so I don't have to come back over here again. Yeah, good question. So what I'm using here for our basic tools where let's say roughing gouge, bowl gouge, scraper, a general purpose angle, general purpose tool we're using a 120 grit belt. Okay? Now, that's on a tool that's already shaped the way I want it. If that was dinged up, torn up, flea market tool, something like that, where I had a lot more to remove, I'm going to switch from this 120 grit belt to a 60 grit belt. Reshape it, and then go to the 120 to refine the scratch pattern. And then on my skew chisel and my detail gouge, I'm going to go to a finer belt, either 240 or 600. Okay? So, we got our table set to 80 degrees. And we're just going to follow the contour of our scraper. Now, with scrapers, most of us know that we want to leave the burr or wire edge on there. And what I think you're going to find with this is when you feel it, you're going to say, that's not much of a burr. And it isn't as prominent. It doesn't stick up as much as what you'll get off a grinder. The problem there is with the grinder, it's a whole bunch of molten metal at that edge. And what we have here is a much sharper burr than what you'll have off of a grinder. It's not as prominent, doesn't stick up as much, but it's a whole bunch sharper and cleaner. So now let's do a skew next. And I'm going to go off of the company script here a little bit. Because if I look at the chart, it's going to tell me that I want to grind that skew at 15 degrees. And that's the way we grind them at the factory. I'm also going to tell you, if you struggle with the skew, that is part of your problem. That is too long a bevel. Okay? Part of mastering this tool is learning to ride the bevel. Well, a 15-degree bevel is so long, it's hard to feel that when you're riding it. It's actually easier to feel a little bit shorter bevel. So while this says 15, and I'm going to do it at 15, I'm also going to tell you that you can probably do yourself a favor if you struggle with a skew by taking it to 20. Some people even take it up to 25. Okay? But you have all of those options available for you in the indexing system. 15 is the very first hole, so if you like a long bevel skew, we can put her right there at 15. And instead of the V block, we have a guide here that sets the skew angle. Right on a skew, we've got two angles to deal with. We have the bevel angle this way and the skew angle this way. The table is setting the bevel angle, and the little skew guide is setting the skew angle. We've got another problem, though. Problem is, when I was doing that scraper at 80 degrees, this was real comfortable. And when I was doing the roughing gouge at 45, this was real comfortable. But when we get all the way down to 15 degrees, you have to stand on your head to see what's going on. Okay? That's no fun. So, when we designed this, we made it so that we can adjust this arm anywhere, lock it back up. No relationship changes between the table and the arm when you do that. The only thing you're changing is the position of the arm relative to the motor. So now you can lay that down, and it's about like working on a bench stone. That 120 grit belt, whoops, let me stand this back up for a second while I change that belt. That 120 grit belt, if I were doing that skew for the very first time, it would be fine, but I like a real fine finish on my skew, so I'm going to change to a 600 grit belt. This is a Trizac belt. 3M makes Trizac material. So the belt change is pretty simple. I'm just going to take this lever right here, push it down. It's going to take the tension off. I'm going to slip the belt back on. And even if you get that on there completely cockeyed, as soon as you start it, it'll track right to the edge of the plat. Every belt, every time. Nope, You do not have to worry about belt direction. And some of the belts will be marked with arrows on them. When they make this abrasive, they don't know how it's going to be converted. They don't know if it's going to be lap seam or spliced. So a lot of times you'll see arrows in there, but you don't have to worry about them. Just put it on however you want it. Okay, so we've got our skew guide. We've got our fine belt. We're going to lay this down. Camera, usually when I lay this down, it gets really hard for anybody to see what's going on, but with that camera set up, it's just fine. All we have to do is bring the spine of the skew against the guide. If you're doing an oval like I am, you got to make sure that your pressure is in the middle of the skew, and then we're just going to feed it in. Then we flip it over and do the other side. And I would typically step over to the other side of the machine, but I don't want to get in the way of the camera here. You guys have got the nicest video system of anything I've seen anywhere in the country. Fantastic setup. Okay. Now we're going to stand this back up. Next thing we're going to do is a fingernail grind on a bowl gouge. Yo! Sure can. Sure can. Okay, so I took the table off, and I'm going to go back to my 120 grip belt. Now I'm going to guess that most of you guys are using some variation of this grind, right? Pretty much everybody using some type of a fingernail shape on your bowl gouge? Okay? Yep. These are really, really simple to sharpen by hand. All you got to do is walk up to your abrasive, whether it's this or a regular grinder or a Tormek, whatever. All you have to do is hold the bevel against the abrasive and turn it in a perfect elliptical arc. And do it exactly the same way every time you go across there. Simple stuff, right? Actually, I know a couple of guys that can do it just like that, and they'll drive you nuts watching them. But even the guys that can do that freehand are going to take about 10 times more material off the gouge than is necessary to get a clean edge. We're going to use a mechanical advantage. We're going to make that simple to do, and we're going to get a fresh edge taking less than 1/1000th of an inch off the length of the gouge. 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches from the front of the jig to the tip of the tool, okay? And that is the only thing that you have to measure. Then we're just going to slide this little guy on that bar, drop the jig in that, Now, right now, we're seeing one of my favorite features of this system. When you do this on a 3/4 inch wide grindstone, you have to constantly reposition yourself to make sure you're always on your abrasive. With that 2 inch wide belt, you can make a nice, smooth turn without ever having to reposition anything. What's that? The angle of the arm is set at the factory. If you just leave it alone, it'll come out perfect. This one. You bet. And that's doing the same thing as this. You've got more variations with this. I'm not smart enough for that. I've got two gouges. I've got a bowl gouge and I've got a detail gouge. All right? Two is all the variations I can handle. But if you like to do a lot of different grinds, then we have this piece right here. That'll give you, 4 different variations that you can do on that. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. Secondary grind is in taking the heel of the bevel off. Just going to extend your protrusion. Okay, so you set up 2.5, and then if you want to take the heel off, give it another 1/2 inch. Any other questions about the sharpening system? Yep, that's a good question. Everything I just showed you, the fingernail jig, the Skew guide, the V-block, and 3 belts come in the package. So just the way I showed it to you, it's $529, and there's nothing else that you have to add on to it to be able to do what I just did. I think that Mike's doing 10% off tomorrow. You can do both. Now, on a detail gouge, I will take that off. On a roughing gouge, I generally don't bother. Now I'm going to show you that there are options you can add to this. Okay, I told you that everything comes with it, and it does, for the most part. Everything you need to do what I did comes with it. But we do have an option that we can add on here. Can't quite see it from the picture, but there's a little part that sticks out here on the end that's called a pigtail mandrel. That pigtail mandrel is a long angle, about not quite the taper of a number 2 Morse taper, but it's a threaded taper. And this is a cotton buffing wheel that has a leather hub. Okay, so that leather hub just threads itself right onto that pigtail mandrel. And then we're going to use a 6,000 grit chromium oxide compound on there. And now on tools where you do want to take the wire edge off, we can just use that to deburr the flute and also to polish the bevel. And that's about a $50 option to add that buffing kit. Yes, sir. Chisels, plane irons, typically what I do for those, this is one of those where the Scotch in me prevents me from selling some accessories. There's a 25-degree angle right there, okay? Now, we sell an optional little guide that drops in the track to guide your chisels and plane irons. But the V-block that comes in the package is actually, in my estimation, a better tool to do that. Because basically, the one that they sell for chisels is not nearly this tall. It's basically, I think it's just about the thickness of the Skew guide, okay, but it's square. But I like the height of that V block, and then I just hold the edge of my chisel against it like that. There's your 25-degree angle, and you don't have to spend any more money. Now, I know you guys are recording that, and if that recording gets back to the guys in Sheffield, I'm toast, so. Okay, so skews and gouges. From now on, instead of saying skews and gouges, I'm going to say traditional tools, okay? Just because those are the traditional tools. Gouges and skews are pretty much how you do about everything. And these are tools where we ride the bevel. Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say ride the bevel? Is everybody really good at doing it? Ooh, I got a few shakes on that one. All right. With this camera right here, can we get right down on the tool? There, we're getting better. Beautiful. Now just a little tighter. Okay, so here's how we go about making sure we're riding the bevel. We're going to hit that material in 3 steps. Step number 1 is tool on the tool rest. Step number 2, I'm going to put the back of the bevel on the stock. Then I'm going to pick my angle up until I get a chip. Now the moment the chip starts coming across the tool, I know that I'm on the bevel. Okay, I'm going to do that a little bit slower. Tool on the tool rest, back of the bevel, pick it up until I get a chip, and make my cut. Now here's where this comes apart for a lot of people. Everybody, I'm not the first one to tell you, anchor, bevel, cut. ABC, 1, 2, 3. However you want to talk about it, it's tool on the tool rest, back of the bevel, pick it up until you get a shaving, make a cut. It sounds so simple, right? Here's the thing. If that tool isn't sharp, it doesn't work. If you've got a rounded edge, at the point where you get the edge where the bevel's riding and the edge should be cutting, if it's not sharp, nothing happens, so you keep going. And pretty soon you're like this. Well, now stuff's coming off, so it must be right, except you don't have any control. That's because you're not cutting, you're scraping. Let's just do... Don't do that. Don't use your fingers to check around. Really, really bad habit of mine. It's almost like I was in my own shop or something. I have 10, and they're mostly all there. All right, so this little section right here, I did with the bevel riding. Now I'm going to do it wrong over here. My tool's probably too sharp to do what I want to do, but you can see I don't have any control. I'm getting it off of there, but it ain't pretty. And when we stop and take a look, this is nice and pretty and smooth, and this is all torn and jagged. Right? That's the difference between scraping and cutting. At least for now. We're going to change your opinion of scraping in a couple of minutes. But that's the basic idea, is that if you've got a sharp tool, ABC works perfectly. But if you think you're riding the bevel, but you're not cutting the way you want to, you probably need to go back to your pro edge. Now, we want to do some work on this piece without the tailstock in play. So that means I need to get this mounted into the chuck. And one of my favorite tools for putting that tenon on there is our bedan. Now the bedan is a 3/8 inch wide. Bedan is short for beading and parting tool. We had to give it a different name because we make another one that we call the beading and parting tool. The bedan is tapered. There we are. It's thicker at the top than it is at the bottom. Okay? And the taper's pretty minimal, but it's there. And that gives you less cutting resistance than a tool that is parallel here. Okay? Now the thing that's cool about this is it's 3/8 of an inch wide. Alright? Most chucks that are out on the market today want a tenon that is a little less than 3/8 of an inch long. You don't want it to bottom out on the jaws. Okay, you don't want this surface to be what you're taking your reference from. You want it to be a shoulder that is true to the center of the lathe. Okay? So you want to take the reference from the top of your tenon, not the bottom. So what that means is we want our tenon a little less than 3/8 of an inch. Well, instead of measuring that, if that's 3/8 of an inch, all I've got to do is not use it all. Okay? So I made it, something more than a quarter, but less than 3/8. And I gave it just a tiny little bit of taper. And while I am putting this in the chuck, I want to show you another one of our products that I truly love, and that is my drive center. This is it's called a steb center. A steb center has a spring-loaded center pin and a whole bunch of really, really sharp teeth. We make it with that same head with a number 2 Morse taper and number 1. I don't think we make a 3, but we make a 1 and a 2. But this one's my favorite because this is designed to fit into the chuck. So instead of having to turn between centers, I don't even have to take my chuck off. I just put that in there. I can turn between centers, get my tenon put on, spin that out, and instead of fighting to get my chuck back on, everything's right where I want it. Then we're just going to drop that in there. Now you always want to use your tailstock when you can. But the chances that the center hole that's in there from being between centers is exactly on center again, it's pretty slim. But if you put your tailstock up there, it'll follow that old hole. So it's always a good idea, before you bring your tailstock up, there's the one I'm looking for, clean that off. Now, there's no ugly little hole for that to fall into. And it'll be right on line. Okay, while I've got that detail gouge in my hand here, let's just talk about using a gouge. It's just like the spindle gouge. Start on the back of the bevel, pick it up, get on the bevel, and make your cove. Now there's just a couple of things here that we need to pay attention to while I'm making that cove. You'll notice that I'm starting from the maximum diameter and working to the middle, then coming up to the maximum diameter and working to the middle. If you try and go on around and come back up the hill, you are going to get a catch. Okay? Gouges cannot work uphill. That's even more true when we pick up a skew. They absolutely cannot work uphill. So like I say, that's the right way to do things. And we feel very strongly that everybody that's going to turn long-term needs to learn those bevel riding skills. But like I said, there's a learning curve to that learn. And some days you get tired of learning and you just want to turn. And we're going to show you some tools that make that a little bit easier. Now, this is a scraper. And before you guys that have been around this a long time start turning up your nose, watch the whole demo. Okay? Now, scraping is a little bit different. We're no longer riding the bevel. The only thing that's touching the stock is the cutting edge itself. And we want to do that with the tool either horizontal or at a slight down angle. Now here's where people get in trouble with scraping tools, is they see their buddies using their gouges and skews and the angle's always up like this. Okay? That's fine for a gouge and skew when you're riding the bevel. But the reason you get a catch with those tools is because you get the edge engaged with an upward angle and the bevel not supporting the cut. And that is bad. Okay? But if we're level or at a slight down angle and something goes wrong, the tool's just going to leave the wood. Okay? So where you get in trouble is trying to scrape with an upward angle. I want just a tiny bit higher. There we go. Okay, so oh, wait a minute. He just went uphill. He did it again. It's not a gouge. It's a scraper. Going uphill is no big deal. But there are two reasons why you want to learn this technique. One of them is it's a whole lot more efficient. Okay, once you learn how to use a gouge, you can move a lot more material a lot faster with a gouge than you can with a scraper. The other reason is surface finish. Now, I've got a pretty good picture of that. It's not, yeah, there we go. So my gouge surface is all but polished. Okay, there's very little sanding needed on that. But my scraper cut is something altogether different. Okay, I've got a lot of grain lift on that. It's fuzzy. This isn't terrible, but it's not. It certainly would take a lot of sanding to get that out. Well, we haven't covered all the options available to us yet. This is why I ask for patience from the guys that have been doing this a while. We don't have to live with that surface finish. We have another technique that we can use, and it's called shear scraping. Now, shear scraping is nothing more than a scrape where the tool is presented at an angle to the stock. And I'm going to do it with a plain old-fashioned bowl scraper, one I sharpened just a minute ago. Okay? Yep, so I've got my tool at a 45-degree angle, but the only thing touching it is the cutting edge. And that shear scrape finish is equal to or better than my gouge surface. Okay? Well, what we did with our Turnmaster is try and make that incredibly simple for everybody to do. Let's see. Where's my camera? There we go. Okay. There we go. All right. So you can see that the tool has got a collar on here, and the head fits on like that. Now the end of the shaft has got 3 little notches on it. There we go. Okay, those 3 little notches, and then the cutter head has got an index pin. So when I'm trying to remove material, I'm going to put that in the middle notch. My cutter is facing straight up, and that's going to give me that nice, aggressive, quick stock removal cutting action. Okay? But now I'm through with that. I've got it just about where I want it. I want that nice surface finish. There is. Sorry about that. What makes this work is the back of the tool is machined flat. So it's always sitting dead flat on my tool rest. So when I get ready to do that shear scraping, instead of trying to balance on a knife edge, I'm going to still be sitting dead flat on the tool rest, but I'm going to turn that over, and now my 45 degrees is automatic. My shear scraping angle is set up by the tool, and we have it in 2 directions. Okay? Ooh, look at those little fuzzies. Fast. $22.23. But you know what? That doesn't matter one way or the other. Speed is your friend, by the way. Did Glenn Lucas talk about that when he was here? Oh, he hasn't been here yet. Well, you know, a lot of turning teachers, the standard presentation line when somebody asks about lathe speed is, you know, speed is your friend, turning faster is going to be cleaner, lots of reasons why to do that. Everybody says turn the speed up until you're uncomfortable and then back it off a little bit. Glenn Lucas has a completely different approach. He says turn the speed up until you're uncomfortable and then turn it a little bit faster. And you'll get comfortable with it eventually. How do you sharpen this? I will cover that. Remind me if I don't do that. Okay, so we've been using a round tip. Now I'm going to take that off. We've been doing coves. Now we're going to do a bead using a square tip. Of course we are. There it is. I knew I had one. Same story when we're doing our shaping work. We're going to use that flat. Get the bead the way we want it. Switch it into shear scrape mode. And pretty much a polished surface, straight off the tool. Sharpening. Okay, while we talk about sharpening, let's also talk about material. The tips for the Turnmaster are available in 3 different materials. I'm only going to recommend 2 of them. They're available in carbide, high-speed steel, and titanium-coated high-speed steel. Now, the one that I'm not a super big fan of is the titanium-coated high-speed steel. And I'll show you why, or I'll remind you that I said that here in just a minute. But with either the carbide or the high-speed steel, all we need to sharpen these is a little diamond lamping plate and a spritz of water. Then we're just going to take the flat side, put the tool flat on the lapping plate, and rub it back and forth like this. And that is as complicated as it gets. On the square cutter, you've got 4 edges that we just sharpened. We can use all 4 sides of that before we have to do that again. On the round cutter, you're using about 1/3 of the arc. The third that is exposed is all that you're using. So you can actually turn the round cutter 3 times before you have to come back and do this again. And I'm sure that some of you have noticed that there's a little bit of a resemblance between this and the Easy Wood tools. There is a difference in the materials, though. The Easy Wood tools are really sharp, but they're a type of carbide cutter made for cutting metal, and they get that super sharp edge by fusing the carbide with some other stuff. I don't understand it all, but if you hone those, you will never get the edge back. It will never be the same edge because there's a coating that is super thin on there, and when that coating is gone, you have a really coarse carbide structure underneath it. So that's why they tell you don't resharpen them, go buy a new one. We're not real keen on that whole concept, so our carbide cutters are not as sharp as theirs when you take them out of the package. They're really close, and you can sharpen ours thousands and thousands and thousands of times, just like I just did, just lapping the top surface. Exactly the same way. Yeah, because here's what you're doing. Anytime you're sharpening, whatever it is, right, you've got 2 planes that you want to meet at one point. All right, well, all we're doing is saying the bevel's already okay. We don't need to do anything on the bevel. All we're going to do is bring that top surface down a little bit. I'll tell you this round cutter, I have been, because people ask me, how long do those cutters last? So I've been using the same round cutter in my demonstration for 2 years now, and sharpening it more than necessary, because people ask me, how do you sharpen it? And I do it, whether it needs it or not. Okay, so that one has lasted 2 years, and a replacement is $15. So you're not going to wear yourself out running to the store getting new tips with this system. Our carbide is more like the carbide you would see on a saw blade or a router bit. It's the same density all the way through, so you can face that off, like I said, hundreds if not thousands of times, and get your edge back. And all you have now, if you drop it or you catch a screw in a faceplate, obviously lapping is no longer going to be enough. You're going to have to regrind the bevel. Okay. Now, if you have to regrind the bevel, and now we're getting to why. No, not too bad. For, I don't know, $10, we make a little holder so that you can work that bevel on a grinder or a pro edge and not have to be right up next to the tip or right up next to the grinder. Okay, so you can regrind the profile on these if you want. And now we're going to get to why I'm not a big fan of the titanium coated tools. I don't carry any of the Turnmaster ones, but when I say titanium coated, drill bits that are gold, like this gouge, that's a titanium nitrate coating. It hardens the surface of the material harder than the material itself is, and it is very, very low friction material as well. So stuff slips off of it, as well as the edge is harder. On a gouge, the part that is actually friction, that's actually exposed to friction, is the inside of the flute. Okay, so when we grind this gouge, grind the bevel on the gouge, the material, obviously, the coating is gone from the bevel, but it doesn't matter. The wear surface is the inside of that flute. Okay, so it works on a gouge. But what I don't like on the Turnmaster tips is our surface where we need that protection is the top of this. Okay, so now we just said you can't hone them anymore. You have to sharpen them by working on the bevel. And now you are going to make them smaller, a lot smaller every time you sharpen. So the titanium tips, to me, are not cost effective. I like the carbide when I'm working in teak, Purple Heart, anything that is super, super abrasive or very, very, very hard, the carbide is going to be an advantage. For most stuff, I prefer the high-speed steel because the high-speed steel has got that finer grain structure I was talking about earlier, and it gives you a little bit cleaner cut than the carbide, and they're a little less expensive, getting back to my Scotch nature. The clearance angle is 10 degrees.
On your literature system,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. What you want for that, what comes in the box are aluminum oxide belts. The best replacement belts that we sell are the ceramic belts. And the ceramic belts will outlast the aluminum oxide by at least 5 to 1. They're only a little bit more expensive, and they will handle all the exotic alloys. No, it'll cut them. It'll cut A11 or M42, but it won't last very long. The ceramic, though, holds up extremely well to those. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, they make them like that. A full round scraper. It's just that this profile. Okay, this is what I call a bowl scraper. All right, and this is set up so that you've got a broader curve to come along the inside of your bowl form. just to smooth out the...
But if you brush that all the way around, you could use it to clean out a groove.
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir.
Well, maybe
You're going to make me talk about it, aren't you? All right. A lot of people really get excited about negative rake scraping, and I'm not going to say that it is not worthwhile, but here's my take on it. All right. The definition of scraping is the only thing touching the wood is the edge itself. All right? So, I'm not entirely sure why having a second angle on there changes anything. You're still only dealing with the edge. Now, where I think a lot of people get excited about negative rake is that you're grinding from both directions, and so you don't have a burr. Well, that is pretty easily solved with the tool I have in my hand. And in my opinion, or from my experience, I should say, you have to try it both ways. You have to try it both with a burr and without a burr, because different types of wood respond differently. That is a negative rake scraper. It's probably dull. It's probably dull. The hardwood scraper. Did you see what I just did there? That's what you need to do. Okay, you need to take a lapping tool of some kind, and you need to work both bevels. A little diamond curve to it. Yep, it sure does. And you can do it on a wheel or on a pro edge or anything, but they do have to be really sharp. Let me show you the original negative rake scraper. Where'd my Skew go? Here we go. That is the original negative rake scraper. It's a Skew, okay? And people got a good clean scrape from a Skew because there's no burr. Okay? It's just a clean, sharp edge. All right? So the negative rake scraper is just two planes meeting without a burr. And that's what I just did to this scraper, is I just took the burr off. Now, particularly in bowl work, you'll find that very often, if you will just take that extra step and take that burr off, it'll cut cleaner in most species. In a lot of species, it'll cut cleaner with the burr. So if you don't get the results you like one way, try it the other and see which way is going to be best. I'm not as keen on that. And again, this is just personal experience. I get if I push a burr, it takes a lot of time and effort that I don't see any advantage to compared to the ground burr. Yo. I polish everything. Now there's one exception to what you just said, and that is our gouges. The inside flute of we're the only company on the market that polishes the inside flute of our gouges. and every one of them is like a mirror when it comes out of the factory. But the rest of the tools typically have just the factory grind finish on them, and I think I mentioned this before. Everything you sharpen is bringing two planes to meet. All right. Now, if that plane is rough and this plane is rough, that's how they meet. You got fingers sticking out there, and that's what you're cutting with. If you smooth, like on the scraper here, the top of my scraper is polished out like a mirror, okay? So whatever finish I put on the bevel is meeting a mirror finish here. It's got to be sharper than if I have the factory grinding scratches there. So not only is it sharper, it's also longer lasting. Yep. Now, that machine right there. I've done it on everything. I've done it on a Tormek. I've done it on dry grinder. I've done it on the Pro Edge. Just hold the corner up like that and run it back and forth. Now, now that you mentioned that, I'm going to talk about something that we just, I'm going to say maybe a year and a half, might be 2 years now. Skews, flat shank skews. These used to all come out of our factory with just the sharp 90-degree, very, very sharp corner on them, okay? And Raffin, Lacer, pretty much everybody that's a skew expert in all of their books say the first thing you need to do with a skew when you get it home is soften the corners of it. And we knew that. And one day Phil said, well, do you know how long that would take us on our equipment? So now, when you buy a new Sorby skew, the corners are already softened. We're not doing it on the scrapers yet. That's a fight for another day. But we are doing it on the skew.
Well, you use that word soften like you soften material.
No. Soften the corner. Soften the corner so that it isn't going to dig into your tool rest when you're rolling a bead. Yeah, it does let you. Yes, you don't have to present as much of a downward angle. That's one advantage to it. The other is it is a tighter clearance angle, which does the clearance angle is something that you want to be careful with. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. If it's thin, like it is on a negative rake scraper, it can bounce. That's why a standard clearance angle on our scrapers is 10 degrees. Okay, that you can get a little bit cleaner cut by increasing the clearance angle, but you also increase the chances that it's going to chatter. Yes, sir. So the question was, what else do we have? The third standard profile is a detail point. Okay? We didn't stop there, though. That's where everybody else stops. Oh, yep. Can we zoom? There we go. So it's a diamond shape for doing little details. And then that's the three standard profiles, and those are available in carbide and high-speed steel. Then we have 4 optional cutters as well. We have 2 bowl scrapers. I'm going to pass these around so everybody can get a close look at them. We got 2 bowl scrapers And then this one we call the mushroom tool. It's for doing undercut rims. And this one is for doing boxes, where you want a straight sidewall and a flat bottom. Yep. One-sided. Let me just back up just a little bit on how much is that. All right, so the Turnmaster gets a little complicated in that we sell it a whole bunch of different ways. You can buy it. My side shield got in my way. There we go. You can buy it with our traditional ash handle and 3 tips. You can get it with the 3 tips in carbide or high-speed steel. Just to give you a ballpark on pricing, the handle tool with 3 high-speed steel tips is about $130. About $15 more for the carbide. Okay? And that's with 3 tips. Now this box that I have here is a set. And it's one that I designed because the unhandled tool is, when we're doing small spindle work, it's really comfortable in our 12-inch handle. But when we're doing bowls, it's nice to have a 16-inch handle. And being Scotch, instead of trying to sell you a 12 and a 16, I said, why don't we just make a 4-inch extension? So now we have a 12 and a 16 in one handle. Okay? And then you'll notice when I demonstrate that instead of changing the little screw in the center of the tip, when I go from one cutter to the other, I just pop in a new head. Makes life a lot faster. Okay? So the heads are available for about $25 a piece. What we did in this box is give you the unhandled shank, 3 heads, all 7 tips, the diamond lapping plates, and there's something that these tools are not very good at, and that is cutting your project off when you're done. Okay? So the kit also includes a parting tool. Okay? That fits in the same handle. And that set, called the Turnmaster Deluxe Box Set, is $2.99. What's that? With the handle. Yep. Everything's in there. Nope, they're all high-speed steel. In the box set, they're the high-speed steel. And the optional cutters that are being passed around right now are only available in high-speed steel. You couldn't make those delicate shapes in carbide. They would snap. Oh, that right wrist is just really getting annoying. Exactly. You can lap sharpen all 7 profiles. Where are those tips in the room? Out the door. Oh, that was pretty clever. Who's got them? Thing I want to talk about is our decorating and spiraling tool. I know a lot of you guys have one of these, and it's a really nifty tool once you know how to use it, but it can be a challenge. Who said challenge? Somebody that owns one said that. All right. Yes, sir. No, that is exactly right. That's the... You are exactly right. Tight grained, very tight grained stock, very clean and clear. Not a lot of quilting. Quilting will mess you up. Knots will mess you up. Softwood will mess you up. Sapwood will mess you up. Okay? So we are talking about a tight grained, solid piece of wood. You'll notice that I bring my own with me for that very reason. This is good quality hard maple. Okay? And that is what you want for the most part to do this. Up here, you guys get really good quality cherry this far north. So you can probably do this in your cherry. Same thing with walnut. The walnut from Missouri, where I'm from, is too open grained, but your walnut's a lot tighter, so you'd probably do fine. But you do not want to try and do this in curly or highly figured stock. Dense hard is good. Open grain hard is bad. Oak. Oak is a perfect example. You know how you can cut a piece of oak if you've got a good sharp blade on your table saw. You can see through the holes. All right, that's the definition of a very hard wood with an open grain structure. All right, so Cocobolo is beautiful for this. Purple Heart is like oak. It's an open grained hardwood. So what you're looking for is tight grained hardwood. Yeah, Paduke's open grain. That wouldn't work. Okay. So what we are doing sounds like a whole bunch of guys already have this tool and have experienced some of the struggles with it. So the rest of you know what we're trying to accomplish. We've got a spiral rim on this bowl. We'll send that around, let everybody take a look. And that spiral rim, we can do that on a face grain piece, obviously, because we've got the little bowl, or a long grain piece, either one. And we're going to talk about doing it on the edge of a bowl, but I'm going to do it on my workpiece here. Basically, I've got a gear. And what we're going to do with that gear is we're going to cut a worm gear with a circular gear. Okay? Now, the angle that the tool, the reason it cuts a gear is because we've got it locked on an angle. And the angle is locked by this bolt-on plate that's on the bottom. All right? That holds the angle constant. Let's go over to this camera and get a little tighter shot on this. Oops. There we go. Okay. So there's a scale right here that is marked. The new one, mine's really old. I just have index marks. Now they're actually marked with numbers on them. But what this controls is the pitch of the spiral that we're cutting. Okay, so where we are now, we're one mark off of top dead center, and so if I roll this over to the second mark from top dead center, the angle is going to go from this to this. Okay. What I recommend if you're struggling with the tool is forget that there's anything past setting number 1, because it's much easier to control there than it is on the longer pitch. The longer pitch makes it harder to do. Now we want the height of the tool rest adjusted so that the bottom of the tool shank, not the bolt-on part, but the tool shank itself needs to be on the center line of the workpiece, and then my tool rest is adjusted in or out so that when I tip this up, I'm not going to fall off my tool rest. Okay? Speed is also very critical. You want to run this at about 700 RPM, between 500 and 700 RPM. Okay. Now there's some complicated math involved here that I hope I don't have to explain, but we'll see. So we're going to do a test cut. Good, I don't have to explain the math. It comes out perfect every time, just like that. This is what you'll get, I'm going to say roughly 2/3 of the time. But occasionally when you make that test cut, you turn the lathe off, and that's not a very, I don't know, are we too bright? There we go. Okay, so you can see that the marks are exactly the same spacing as the teeth. Okay, every tooth has got a groove, and every groove has got a tooth. All right, so let's just pick any random mark. We'll say that one right there. All right, if that was the very first one that we cut, when it made one full circle, it landed right back on a tooth. And so it tracked, and we get a nice spiral like this. About 1/3 of the time, what you'll get instead is 2 times that many marks, or 3 times that many marks, or just a whole chewed up mess. Okay? And here's what happened to you. The circumference of the workpiece has to be an even multiple of the space between the teeth. Okay? Now, you don't have to do the math, but it's a good idea to wrap your mind around what's going on. All right? What happens is, again, pick any random mark. If you don't get this clean start, what that means is the first mark that you cut, when it came back around, it didn't land on a tooth. It landed in the gap, and the teeth started cutting over again. And so we got a whole new set of marks. And then on the next revolution, we got another new set of marks. And on the next revolution, we got another new set of marks. And pretty soon, all you've got is a mess. So, when that happens to you, all you have to do is change the diameter of the workpiece by a tiny bit. You're always within a 64th of an inch of having a clean start. Okay? So if you don't get a clean start, shave it down a tiny bit, enough to get rid of the marks. By the time you get rid of the marks, you're ready for your next test cut. When you get a clean start, the really cool thing about this is the teeth of the cutter will fall right back into the grooves, he said with all confidence. You just got to kind of finesse it a little bit, bring it up there nice and easy, and let it find the grooves. Okay? Then we're going to tip it up. And when you tip it up, that's when it actually starts cutting. Okay? Now, here's something that just doesn't make any sense until you think about it a little bit. All right, so we just talked about the fact that the diameter of the workpiece is super critical here. Well, it's super critical for getting started, but for some reason, once you have it started, you can take that around a curve. He said confidently again. Oh! So you can't actually take that around a curve. You can't start it on a curve. You can't start it on an angle or a slope. But once you get it started, you can continue around a curve.
How far down the street?
He once again said confidently. Oops. It's still there. Okay, let's talk about the bowl that's floating around. I show that to people and they look at it and they say, wow, that's really cool. How did you get the tool to work on that little bitty narrow edge? And I say, magic. I'll show you that. All right. So it isn't magic. You don't do it on that little bitty narrow edge. Turn your bowl blank to a cylinder. Do it just like I did it here, and do about an inch. And then cut your bowl form. So much easier. So much easier than trying to do a little bitty narrow edge. Okay, somebody asked about sharpening. We're going to tuck it under our arm. Tuck it under your arm. Take your diamond lapping tool that you use for absolutely everything. Going to lay that flat on that bevel. Give it 3 or 4 strokes. Turn it 3 or 4 teeth. 3 or 4 strokes, 3 or 4 teeth. 3 or 4 strokes, 3 or 4 teeth. Now you do that every time you pick this up, and you'll always have it sharp instead of having to spend an hour doing this to get a fresh edge back up. Keep it sharp instead of making it sharp. Alrighty? Now, the other thing that I want to show is that when you come off the edge, it'll always be a little bit fuzzy. And this will look better if you'll make sure that you've got space in your project to clean that exit edge off. And I also think it looks better if you do that at an angle. When you cut that at an angle instead of dead straight, you get little, I call them ocean waves out of that. Now I want to show you something with that tool that the guys at Sorby who designed it never even dreamed of. So, we're tool designers, right? We design tools, we make tools. When we make a tool, we make a whole bunch of rules. There are rules to how you use this tool. Then, we put it out on the market, and we sell it to artists. And what do the artists want to know? The artists want to know what happens when you start breaking the rules. And one guy in particular, a guy by the name of Nick Agar, got a hold of this particular tool, and he said, well, that silly thing that keeps the angle constant, I don't want that. I want to be able to change the angle whenever I want. So he took it off. And then he started playing with the tool. And he came up with a bunch of really, really cool things that we could do. We want to be right on the end of the workpiece. There we go. Okay, back to 700-ish. And the first thing we're going to do here is I'm going to put a sunburst on this. And for my sunburst, I'm going to take the tool at about a 45-degree angle this way. I'm going to come in at about a 45-degree angle. I want to work just about right on the center line. Once I get it tracking, I'm going to pull it to me and roll it just a little bit. What was that? Flatter. Like this. Okay, there's our sunburst. Now I'll come outside the sunburst. I'm going to turn it over so that I'm just using the backside points. That's going to put a series of dots on there. Now I'm going to turn it back over this way, back to 45, but this time I'm not going to move it. I'm just going to hold still. That'll give us little diagonal stripes. And if we had a bigger piece, we could just keep going with different angle presentations. If you were doing a box lid, I would say stop, put a little wax on it, and you'd be done. We're going to make a top, so we're going to put some color on there for the kids. You guys all know about these things? These are Tombow markers, T-O-M-B-O-W. They're alcohol-based, and so they will color the wood without bleeding into the bottom of the marks we just made. Use a couple different colors here. And the white really pops then. Oh, yeah. There went my spiral edge. Did I get all of it? Yep, every bit. Don't like that extra adapter in there. Should have brought my 33 by 3.5 chuck. I knew you guys had it one way, and I've got the right chuck. I'm so used to the 1.25 inch. Oh, it's a good one. That's an awful lot of praise for a top.